Thank you, Chairman Risch, and thanks for holding this committee hearing. And Ranking Member Menendez, this is a critical part of our U.S. trade agenda right now, as well as critical for immigration policy and with regard to drug policy. So I'm going to try to touch on all three quickly. One, on the trade front, is USMCA good or bad for Mexico? Mr. Kozak.
Well, I think the Mexican administration seems to have made the judgment that it's good because they have adhered to it and moved it forward.
Yeah. In fact, they're done with their processes there.
Ratified.
And, we've come up with an agreement that meets a lot of the criteria that many in this body have called for over the years, like enforceable labor standards, enforceable environmental standards. In fact, a 70% requirement of steel coming from North America for our cars, and a minimum wage in North America for auto workers. So my hope is we can get that done, because it is good for Mexico, and it's also good for us, and it's good for our deepening of our relationship and other issues. On the drug front, Secretary Madison, you spoke earlier about the flow of narcotics, and one thing you mentioned was the fentanyl coming now from the south. Fentanyl traditionally, as you know, has come through the mail system, mostly through the U.S. mail system, by the way, not the private carriers, directly from China. That poison comes right into our neighborhoods. But increasingly, we're seeing it coming over the border. Can you give us some sense of that, what the numbers are, and where is it being made? We've heard different things. One is that there were a couple of fentanyl illicit chemical companies in Mexico that were shut down. Others say, it's still being made south of the border. Some say it's coming in from China to Mexico, then being often converted into pill form and coming in. Tell us a little about that. Fentanyl being the deadliest of all of the drugs, the opioid that's killing the most people in my home state of Ohio.
Yes, Senator. Obviously, we do a lot of work on the opioid issue writ large, and you are correct. It's a very pernicious business model, sold on the darknet, direct to consumer, paid for with anonymizing financial mechanisms, and then dropped into the mail and showing up in tiny and large towns all across this country with very deadly results. We are very concerned, actually, that yes, we've begun to see production in Mexico, and not on a huge scale, but I don't think it takes huge scale for it to be a problem, right? I think any production in Mexico should be of concern to us. I do think precursor chemicals still come from China. I do think some finished product comes from China. I've been out talking to some other governments about what they're seeing, and I think there's a fair amount of transshipment going on where it gets mailed from China to a third country and then kind of makes its way here. So I think that the traffickers are just basically adjusting to the countermeasures that we put in place. With regard to Mexico specifically, we have been talking to the government of Mexico about this particular issue and about the urgency and imperative for them to take it on. We've done a lot of work with them in their ports to get them up to our standards in their airports and their maritime ports. We've done a lot of work with them on the border with non-intrusive inspection equipment, but more importantly, we've built a canine program there, which is actually one of the more effective ways to tackle this. It's 500 dogs, and we did it in cooperation with the RCMP. So the Mexicans are doing some interdictions, but I think this production piece is a major concern. Yesterday, as I mentioned, I was up in New York, and one of the things I did was meet with the deputy commissioner from China's National Narcotics Commission, and one of the things I explicitly talked to them about was the need for them to be working with Mexico and working with us on the precursor flow. Because there is a pattern of behavior that existed before synthetic opioids, which is methamphetamine production in Mexico. Right. And so the neural pathways are already there with the criminal organizations to send those precursor chemicals. We've also worked with Mexico to update their system for tracking precursor chemical imports and exports, which is another piece of this puzzle.
Have they done everything they can do in terms of scheduling the precursors? China, as you know, has made some changes in its laws, not enough yet, and they aren't enforcing it the way we'd like them to, but at least they are doing something by making it illegal. Has that happened in Mexico with regard to the precursors?
I think there's more work to be done in Mexico. I'm going to be there next week, particularly to talk about this.
Let us know what we can do in that regard. You mentioned some of the measures that are being taken. One is one that came through this committee and others, which is the STOP Act, which is now law, which has helped to keep some of this flow coming through our mail system. And that's one reason you see the transshipments, I believe, because I think you're right, there's so much money in this. On the crystal meth, we used to have meth labs in Ohio. We don't anymore. And it's not for a good reason. It's because it's so cheap and so much more powerful now coming directly from Mexico, and the same cartels are selling it, I'm told, on the streets of Columbus, Ohio. It's less expensive than marijuana for a similar dose. So I do think the crystal meth issue has become now a new epidemic, in a sense, in a lot of our communities. And Mexico is the source, I'm told, of almost all that crystal meth. Is that accurate?
They are definitely a source of, I don't know if it's all, but they are definitely a source. And I think from our perspective, there's a lot more work to do on the drug front with Mexico, and that's part of the reason I'm going down there. 'Cause we have a very practical conversation that we need to have about what comes next. The other thing I will just add is the challenge that we're going to have is as we go after the synthetic opioids and the fentanyls, what's going to happen is there's such agility in the synthetic drug market that they're going to continue to basically innovate, and we're going to have to sort of adjust our strategies. And I think that is challenging because all these control mechanisms, they can quickly work their way out of them, and I think that's going to be one of the ongoing challenges that we have as we talk to governments about what else we can do together.
We appreciate your service, and my time's expired, and working directly with DHS, because the acting secretary, McElhaney, is also, as you know, working on this issue. And again, STOP Act is working, it's great. The Interdict Act is working, it's helpful. But you're right, there's so much money in it, and a slight change in the chemical compound can, and other adjustments in synthetic drugs is truly frightening. So thank you for your service there, and let us know what we can do to be more helpful. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.